Welcome to Westmoreland Community Connections, a look at issues and happenings on Classic Hits 107.1 WHJB. Here now is your host, Chad Amond, President and CEO of the Westmoreland County Chamber of Commerce.
Hello and welcome to Westmoreland Community Connections. I'm your host, Chad Amond, President and CEO of the Westmoreland County Chamber of Commerce. I am delighted today to have on the show Julie Donovan. Julie is the Director of Marketing and Public Relations for Fort Ligonier. Fort Ligonier is near and dear to my heart, Julie. If Fort Ligonier did not exist, Westmoreland County would not have Fort Amond children, because my wife and I met at Fort Ligonier days back in 1996.
Oh, hey, Chad, thank you so much for having me on today. And of course, we love that story. We love the story of how you and your wife met. Your kids are fantastic ambassadors for Fort Ligonier. We often quote your one son, who said it was the best day of his life ever, the day he spent at summer camp at Fort Ligonier. So we really appreciate the your family's support.
Well,
thank you.
With the great work that you do, we will get into Alex Amond's quotes a little bit later.
We are hoping to recruit him for a volunteer and then eventually an employee.
Well,
so we have ulterior motives.
That's good. He needs to work. So, but let's back up. And for those listeners that don't know a whole lot about you, but I don't think there's many people in Westmoreland County that don't know Julie Donovan.
Well,
but
thank you, Chad.
Let's give those listeners a little bit about your background.
Thank you so much. I particularly love being on your show because I am a lifelong Westmoreland County resident, very proud of that. Was born and raised in Ligonier, graduated from Ligonier High School, and graduated from Seton Hill. And I've been very fortunate. My entire career has somehow been promoting some asset of Westmoreland County. Early in my life, I owned my own small business. Then I'm a former director of the Ligonier Valley Chamber of Commerce. Yeah. Then I was involved with Laurel Mountain Ski Resort, which not everyone realizes is in Westmoreland County.
Right. We talk about it all the time.
Everyone associates it with Somerset County because the county line, the Summit Road, divides the two counties. Yeah. But the ski area actually sits in Westmoreland County. So I have been a part of that project. Was very proud to be a part of that when it reopened in '99. I spent 14 years at the Laurel Highlands Visitors Bureau, and that's how I ended up at Fort Ligonier, because Annie Urban was the executive director at the Laurel Highlands Visitors Bureau and hired me back in 2002, and then she left in 2008 and went to the Fort. I stayed at the Bureau until 2015, but joined the Fort team in the winter of 16 because of the big expansion and renovation and the big projects going on there.
Well, we're going to get into the expansion and the renovation project, but for those listeners that maybe are just not history buffs, right? Let's give them a. I know that you are not the.
I am not the brainiac. I am the first to say I am not the brainiac. We have a remarkable director of history and collections, Erica Knuckles. Actually is receiving her doctorate in a few weeks. She'll be Dr. Knuckles in our education department. But what I am very fortunate, I get to help tell the stories about Fort Ligonier and promote the fort and all the wonderful reasons why visitors should be there. And you do not have to be a history buff to love Fort Ligonier.
Well, that's why I want your perspective on the history of Fort Ligonier, because there's a lot of people that aren't the history buffs. It's just like if you go to the art museum, you may not be the person that could say, okay, this is why this person painted this and why this person painted that. Just give the listeners an overview of the history of Fort Ligonier.
If you're from the area, and even if you're not, I think you should have an appreciation for what Fort Ligonier did for the world. So it was the 1700s. Ligonier, Fort Ligonier was a British fort from 1758 to 1766. General Forbes was in Philadelphia, leading the British Army across Pennsylvania on his way to Pittsburgh because the French had captured, and it was Fort Duquesne.
Yeah.
So can you imagine if you've ever driven Route 30 the whole way to Breezewood, you know how curvy and windy that road is.
Yeah, right.
And just think about those soldiers in the 1700s and
it wasn't paved back then, right?
The camp followers and the wagons
Right.
and what the trek that was. Who wouldn't have an appreciation for that? And so Fort Ligonier was the last fort before Pittsburgh. It was strategically placed 50 miles from Bedford and 50 miles from Pittsburgh. So the whole reason Fort Ligonier Days exists, back to how you and your wife met, not just a fun festival where you do listen to great music and see a great parade and eat a lot of great food.
Right.
It exists because it commemorates the key battle that happened there October 12th, 1758. If it wouldn't have been for that successful battle, then the British could go on to Pittsburgh, capture, and it became Fort Pitt, and it became Pittsburgh.
That's right.
So that's why we say we made Pittsburgh possible.
So if we don't go back to 260 years, we would not be able to get the greatest funnel cake in the world at Fort Ligonier Days, right?
Chad, you made the best connection ever. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So for those listeners, I mean, a lot of times people think that Fort Ligonier is a state park or a national park or something like that. Who owns Fort Ligonier?
Fort Ligonier, it is private. It's privately owned. You can actually be a member. The Fort Ligonier Association membership is very affordable. It's $35 for one person. It's $50 for a couple, and that includes free admission anytime, even during Fort Ligonier Days. And it also includes a discounted registration fee for a ton of our special programs.
Right.
So we are privately funded. We rely purely on our admission fees, our membership fees, and contributions, donations.
You're listening to Westmoreland Community Connections on Classic Hits 107.1 WHJB. I'm your host, Chad Amond, president of the Westmoreland County Chamber of Commerce. We're talking with Jolie Donovan. Jolie is the Director of Marketing and Public Relations for Fort Ligonier. Jolie, over the last couple of years, maybe 2 years, there has been a lot of dust and trucks and things like that over at the fort. Tell the listeners what has been going on and what is the renovation project all about?
Oh, thanks so much for asking, Chad. And we are so happy that we are finished, just as Ligonier's renovation Renaissance project is underway. About 6 or 7 years ago, our staff and our board of trustees did an interpretive plan where they really critically assessed from a visitor's viewpoint, what are the needs at the fort and at the museum. And we'd really outgrown the museum because our education programs had just absolutely exploded with the expansion of our education department. For example, we host a whole class of St. Vincent College students are there learning how to teach social studies and history, actually using the fort. So there was a need to expand and build an education center because we had outgrown the facility. The students were in the museum, the visitors were coming into the museum. So there was a plan developed for a major expansion to build a new center for history education. At the same time, completely renovate the museum and do a new interpretation of all the new exhibits. So it's been a 2-year plan that has just been completed. There's 3 phases. The first phase was building the new education center.
And the education center, is that the what I'll call the banquet facility that
It may look like a banquet facility.
Okay.
We refer to it as the Center for History Education.
Okay.
And organizations such as yours have used it and held events there. And it is open for nonprofits, community groups, corporate groups. It is available to the public, but there must be some educational component tied back to the fort.
Okay.
For example, our Director of History and Collections spoke to your group.
Right.
It can be a speaker. It can be a special tour. It
So
can
you're
be a
not
program.
hosting weddings?
No,
there.
we're not
Right.
a wedding venue. We're not a prom or a shower, but we are available for corporate events, team building events, civic, nonprofit.
And how many people can the education center seat?
At round tables, approximately 150 to 160. We're capable of theater style, up to 300. As you know, we have that beautiful, as adjacent, that patio with that striking view looking out over the fort. We've hosted, there's a group from Westmoreland County, the military, retired military officers organization. That's an example that have used the facility for their programs. So we've hosted a variety of businesses and civic groups.
Wow. And so there were two renovations going on at the same time. I mean, it seemed like they were all combined, but you added on the education center that can seat and host programs and for the venue. But then there was also the renovation of the museum itself. Let's get into...
During we broke ground in the spring of 2016 for the new education center. So the museum and the fort stayed open while that was being built during the summer of 16 and the fall of 16. So then we closed for the season at the end of October 16, and that's when the museum renovation began. And everything reopened in the spring.
It reopened...
Of last year.
Of spring of last year.
Of last year, but the renovation of the galleries was completed, but not the installation of the exhibits.
Okay.
That just happened last October.
Well, let's talk about a little bit of what has been added into the galleries and the exhibits.
So going back a little bit, Chad, to the history, George Washington was at Fort Ligonier. He was only 26 years old, and he was there in 1758.
Wow.
So we have some really impressive artifacts of his handwritten remarks or his memoirs about his time on the western frontier, his saddle pistols that were owned by the Marquis de Lafayette and gifted to him. So those were on display in the museum before, but we created a brand new George Washington gallery around those really rare artifacts. So there's a brand new George Washington gallery, a brand new history gallery.
So the pistols and things are in the George Washington gallery.
Instead of interspersed throughout the
okay.
museum. Everything in the gallery is all about George Washington. And a really neat audio component. You can pick up a phone and listen to stories. And it really makes the connection between the French and Indian War and the American Revolution.
Right. You're listening to Westmoreland Community Connections on Classic Hits 107.1 WHJB. I'm your host, Chad Amond, president of the Westmoreland County Chamber of Commerce. We're talking with Jolie Donovan, director of marketing and public relations for Fort Ligonier. When we return, we're going to talk a little bit about how the fort is incorporating technology with their exhibits and some of the exhibits and the events that you can attend. We'll be right back after these messages.
This is Westmoreland Community Connections on Classic Hits 107.1 WHJB. If you have a suggestion for a topic, or if your nonprofit organization would like to be featured on this program, call us during regular business hours at 724-216-1200.
Welcome back. You are listening to Westmoreland Community Connections on Classic Hits 107.1 WHJB. I'm your host, Chad Amond, President and CEO of the Westmoreland County Chamber of Commerce. We're talking with Jolie Donovan. Jolie is the Director of Marketing and Public Relations for Fort Ligonier. If you were listening to the first segment of the show, we went through the history, a brief history of Fort Ligonier. If the fort did not exist back in 1758, 260 years ago. 260 years ago, Jolie, this Western Pennsylvania would not be what it is today, and this country may not be what it is today.
Absolutely. It played a pivotal role in world history. And that's why I so encourage anyone to come out and just see our phenomenal exhibits, and you'll understand the story. It's portrayed in a very easy and understanding way.
Well, I've been on the front line with that. I have 4 kids, and my kids have gone through Fort Ligonier camp, which you host.
We love those Amond kids.
Which you host in the summers, and I had my son, who is now in 3rd grade, probably has been going through the Fort camp since 1st grade, and he just loves it.
And again, as I've already mentioned, we quote him frequently because he said it was the best day of his life ever, and we just love that, because if we can instill love of history and exploration in a young mind, our day is made.
Well, you are also incorporating some technology with some of the exhibits. This internet thing is just not a fad anymore, right? Well, it's keeping up, and you have to keep up with the data.
We are so excited. We are launching in our new history gallery the Fort Duquesne diorama. The diorama shows this scene of the British taking Fort Duquesne. So it's going to be kind of like an avatar. That's the best way that I can describe it.
Wow.
And there'll be an iPad there, but then you can kids or adults, anyone can download an app on their phone or iPad, and you take it and as you go over the diorama, it comes to life.
Oh, wow.
And that you hear the sounds of the artillery and you see the flames, and it is so dramatic. It is so cool. So it's a way we're introducing technology with the diorama. And then our art gallery has iPads that you can learn about Sir Joshua Reynolds or Rembrandt Peale. If you love the works of the one artist, you go to the iPad and you can find his name and discover other works of art.
So you're embracing the history and the technology, because the millennials and the young people, and hey, I'm on this phone every 2 minutes of myself. But if you're embracing the history and the technology, you're going to probably get more interest with the fort.
Absolutely. And we plan to increase using technology in the future even more.
Well, we talked about some of the renovations with the education center and the museum itself, but the fort itself is what I think I've heard Annie say, it's fortifying the fort, correct?
Absolutely. So, Chad, we launched this big campaign called Fortifying Our Future. 3 phases: the education center, the renovation of the museum, and preservation of the fort. So the fort is on the original footprint of what it was in the 1700s. Now, of course, that's not the original wood.
Right.
So, but
it's in the same place.
It's in the exact same place, based on a map from Great Britain, based on the map. So our on-site preservationist with Heritage Restorations, Brad Mooney, and a member of our staff, Eric Lebo, have been painstakingly working to replace in the upper fort. And it's fascinating to watch this process go on. It's the 3rd phase of the campaign, rebuilding parts of the upper fort. And during this past winter, they actually rebuilt what's called rolling stock, a Conestoga wagon, different types of artillery and wagons.
Well, I've obviously been to a number of different events out at the fort, but some people in our community just, they think that I have to be a history buff to go out there.
No, not at all.
But they don't.
But I think once you're there, you do have an appreciation for what took place there. But we have fabulous events year round.
So what are some of those events that are coming up?
Coming up in the summer months, History Happy Hour. Who wouldn't love a History Happy Hour?
Right.
The fourth Friday in June, July, and August. It's outside in the lower fort. We turn our blacksmith shop into a bar and have spirits and hors d'oeuvres and live music. And it's a fabulous environment. And if it rains, we just move it inside into the education center. Memorial Day weekend is our 18th century military encampment. It is our second largest encampment after Fort Ligonier days. So I really encourage, if you don't want to brave the crowds during Fort Ligonier days, come out to the Fort Memorial Day weekend.
So those are some of the individuals that are the reenactors, correct?
Yes.
I mean, tell the listeners a little bit about the reenactors.
Reenactors are really cool people. It's for many, it's a passion. It's their hobby. It's what they love to do. It's quite expensive. It's really an investment in their clothing and in their artillery. During Fort Ligonier days, we have more than 200 reenactors representing the British and the French and the Native Americans, and they're encamped literally at the fort. So when everyone thinks of Fort Ligonier days, they think of just the battle reenactments and the artillery demonstrations, which are very cool. But what I love is that you actually walk around the camps within the fort and see how they lived.
Right.
So it is our director of history and collections grew up as a reenactor. Her parents took her as a little girl around to all the different historic sites. So it created this love of history with her.
Right. Well, you have a major event. Well, not that all of your events aren't major events, but you also have a major fundraiser coming up in 2018. The Cannonball?
The Cannonball. And we were very proud that our 2017 Cannonball, Chad, landed on the Tribune Review's top 5 list of unique fundraisers.
Right.
You've been there, you know how unique it is. It is our largest benefit of the year. It used to be called the Musket Ball, and we had to take a year off while the center was being built. And when it returned, it is called the Cannonball.
So it went from musket to cannon.
Musket to cannon.
It got bigger.
It got
bigger.
It got bigger. And we had approximately 425 guests. This year, it will be Saturday, September the 22nd.
September 22nd. So, and it usually sells out each year.
It
so
does.
You got to get on board quick.
Tickets are available in July, and the listeners can just go to fortligonier.org or give us a call for ticket information or when they're available. It is open to anyone. It's open to the public, but we do have to limit the number just because of space.
You're listening to Westmoreland Community Connections on Classic Hits 107.1 WHJB. I'm your host, Chad Amond, president of the Westmoreland County Chamber of Commerce. Julie Donovan, director of marketing and public relations at Fort Ligonier, is our guest. Julie, it used to be that the fort, when it was cold and snowy, the fort would start to dwindle down a little bit. Now it's open year round, correct?
It is. Well, Chad, we had a campaign this past winter called Siege the Winter.
Okay.
Now the actual fort has to be closed during the winter months because of maintenance and just visitors walking up into the hill and everything. But the museum for the first time stayed open winter weekends, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Christmas week. So we are now a year-round operation. The education center's open year-round, and the museum.
For those listeners that say, "Hey, I'm going to go. I want to go out today." What are the hours of the fort?
So we're open 7 days a week. Monday through Saturday, 9:30 to 5, and Sundays, 11 to 5. During the months of June, July, and August, we are open till 7 o'clock in the evening, Thursday and Friday evenings.
If you want more information, you can jump on to fortligonier.org. That's fortligonier.org, or call the fort directly at 724-238-9701. And I will say, whenever I call the fort, I rarely like being put on hold, Julie. But whenever I call the fort, I ask them to put me on hold because they have the colonial
the 18th
music,
century colonial music.
Yeah, It's one of the greatest.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you so much.
So what else would you want the listeners to know about Fort Ligonier and the good work that you're doing in the community? Obviously, tourism is important to Westmoreland County. It's one of the key drivers of our economy.
Absolutely, and thank you for asking, Chad. In addition to the role that we play as a significant site in the county, we also take seriously a social responsibility to offer the fort. There are multiple opportunities where visitors can come for free, regardless of where they live. We have an event called Friendly Fire Friday.
Friendly Fire Friday.
For free.
For free.
So the first Friday in June, July, and August, anyone can come to the fort for free.
Right.
And we fire the artillery.
Oh, wow.
So we make sure that our local police have a list of the dates we're firing the artillery.
Yeah, right.
Because you just happen to be strolling through Ligonier and you hear a big boom.
Yeah.
We're firing our 6-pound cannon.
No kidding.
Yes.
The cannon. That's called First Friday.
Friendly Fire Friday for free.
Friendly Fire Friday for free. So that's on a radio show. I appreciate you bringing that up. That's
and it's June 1st, July 6th, and August 3rd.
So if you want to learn more about Fort Ligonier, jump on to their website at fortligonier.org. Julie, we're going to round it out with any last comments that you want to make, but I'll also ask you, where do you see the fort going in the next 5 or 10 years?
Well, Chad, that's a fantastic question. Thank you so much. We still have some other projects yet to be finished. A research library in the lower level of the museum. Fort Ligonier attracts scholars from around the world for our collection. So that's another phase that we need to do yet, is complete our research library. We really just are on the cusp of our attendance increased 17.5% last year. So we really think we're just at the beginning of seeing increased attendance and even more visitors. And I know it's said so many times, sometimes we don't appreciate what's in our own backyard. So I would just love it if all of your listeners would please come out and see us at the fort.
Jolie, I think that they need to. I absolutely think that they need to. Going back to October 12th of 1758, 260 years ago, Western Pennsylvania, Westmoreland County, and our country wouldn't be what it is if we didn't have Fort Ligonier. So thank you, and thank your team, your outstanding team,
thank you, Chad,
for all the good work that they do out at Fort Ligonier. If you want to jump on to the Fort Ligonier's website, it's fortligonier.org, or give them a call at 724-238-9701. And thank you very much, Julie, for being on the show.
We look forward to welcoming your listeners this summer.
Well, I'm hoping that they're going to be out there. You've been listening to Westmoreland Community Connections on Classic Hits 107.1 WHJB. Join us next week, same time, same place, for another edition of Westmoreland Community Connections. Thanks for listening, everyone.
This has been Westmoreland Community Connections, a look at issues and happenings in and around Westmoreland County. Join us again next week on Classic Hits 107.1 WHJB.